Hey friends, so welcome to the video today where I'm going to be taking you along for some foods I'm preparing for our weekend camping trip. So we are taking our kids primitive camping for the first time. It's going to be an adventure, and I am just preparing a lot of foods for us to have for meals while we're there, to be able to easily heat on a fire or on a griddle, and then just some snacks. So here you see me preparing some apples. I'm going to let these simmer down and thicken up and make some delicious apple pop-tarts. Next, I'm moving on to biscuits. This is our all-time favorite sourdough biscuit recipe. I've shared it 2 or 3 times now on the channel. I have a full video dedicated just to the biscuit recipe, so you can check that out. I will link it in the cards as well as down below. But this recipe is a 24-hour long ferment, so you're getting those full benefits of the sourdough starter. If you do have trouble tolerating grains, this is the perfect recipe for that. And these biscuits are so fluffy, so flaky. They have those delicious layers like canned biscuits, but so much better for you, and they're sourdough long fermented. So here I'm just kneading the dough for about a minute and then rolling it out and adding our leavening agents, our baking soda, baking powder, and salt. Then I'm going to knead that back into the dough for 3 or 4 minutes, and then we'll start making those thick, fluffy layers. I have my little biscuit helper here. She loves rolling out dough, any kind of dough, but she's always around when I'm making biscuits. So I'm excited to be able to teach her this recipe and pass down all these recipes to my children. So we are just starting the first set of envelope folds. We're going to roll it out and then fold it into thirds just a few times to give those fluffy layers in your biscuits that our family absolutely loves. And then to cut out my biscuits, I've used a variety of tools. I used to have a nice handed down biscuit cutter from my great-great-grandmother, but I make biscuits so much that the handle came off. It was just a really old antique, so I was really sad about that. So I usually just use a measuring cup. I've also used a mason jar, but I find that the measuring cup, this with that sharp edge, does cut the biscuits a little better. Then I'm going to place them into a preheated cast iron oven. You want to make sure whatever baking vessel you're cooking on is preheated so that your food doesn't stick and that nice bottom layer of your biscuit is not stuck to the bottom of your baking dish. Moving on to bread. I like to always have bread in our house, especially on a camping trip if we need a quick side to go with something, or for sandwiches. This particular bread loaf is going to go along with some chili that we're going to be making later on in this video, so you'll see that soon as well. Just getting it out from its proof and getting it ready for its final cold proof. So we're stretching the dough into a large rectangle, folding it into thirds, rolling it up, and building tension in the loaf, and then it will go back into my Bannatyne baskets into the fridge for a 2 to 3 hour cold proof before we bake the bread later this afternoon. Moving to the chili. So I'm going to make this chili recipe in my crock pot, so I can easily unplug the crock pot, transport it to the campground, and then plug it up when we get there so we can eat it for dinner that night. But I am going to go ahead and pre-brown the meat so that it gives that good flavor of the browned meat before I add it to the crock pot. And then you see me sneaking a little ice pop of liver pate here. I've talked about this before, but I'm always trying to find ways to add liver organ meats into my family's diet. So this is liver pate that I'm adding into there, and it just kind of melts down. You don't ever taste it, your family will never notice it, and it's just a way to add liver and other organ meats if you want to into your family's diet. Next, we're moving to the Pop-Tarts, the most excited recipe to share in this video. So I have that same sourdough pie crust that I made in my last video when we made meat pies, but we're going to do like a sweet Pop-Tart, apple Pop-Tart in this video. So I have that same sourdough recipe, rolling it out, cutting it into little squares. You could make whatever size squares you want. I have younger children, so I typically make our foods a little smaller just so it's easier for them to hold in their hands, but They would have easily ate a bigger Pop-Tart if I had made these bigger, because these turned out absolutely delicious. I'm putting them onto a baking sheet, and then we'll go back and add that apple filling and bake them. So these were a hit. I took these to take as snacks, so we actually warmed them on a griddle at the campground and ended up eating them for breakfast one day along with some eggs. They were so good. So this is a recipe I will probably continue to make quite often here in our home with just whatever fruit is in season. I grew up loving Pop-Tarts as a typical 90s kid, my husband as well, but Pop-Tarts, packaged Pop-Tarts, we all know are not healthy. This is a much more delicious, much healthier version. These were absolutely delicious. So try this out if you want just a yummy, delicious side to kind of go with breakfast, or just something for a snack. You could easily pair this with some protein and have a really good snack as well. I'm adding that meat to the chili, and this chili is pretty much done. I don't really have a chili recipe. I kind of just add ingredients, add spices that are in season that we're craving, and that's how I make chili. So I do properly prepare our beans in the Instant Pot and let them soak, let them properly cook so that they are more easily digestible, because beans are a great food source, but if they're not properly prepared, our bodies can't digest them and break them down as they need to. So I'm getting the last of the chili together. I just have tomato sauce in here, broth, beans, lots of spices, meat, and I think that's it. And then we're going to start this with sourdough bread tonight at our first night camping. The biscuits that I had made this morning are now done and ready to cool. I'm putting them onto this baking sheet to let them cool. You see how nice and fluffy they are. These would have been much better eaten hot, but we did warm them on the griddle at the campground and they were just as good. So a little trick I have when baking bread, if you don't want that really crunchy bottom on your crust, which my family usually doesn't eat that part anyway because it's just kind of crunchy. I honestly love crunchy bread. My family does not so much. So I find that if I put a trivet on the bottom of my baking vessel, that the bottom of the bread will not get that brown crispy crust that some people love, but my family just particularly doesn't. So I do that a lot of times for them so that they don't have that crunchy bottom on their bread. So try that little trick out if your family is not a fan of the super crunchy bottoms that come usually on sourdough bread when you cook them in a really hot Dutch oven like this. Moving to the icing for the Pop-Tarts, I'm taking a little bit of cream that I skimmed earlier this morning and adding it with some powdered sugar and some vanilla just to consistency. I really don't measure. I've said that many times here before. I just mix, add as I need. Always add less because you can't take away, but you can add more. So I'm adding just a tad bit of powdered sugar at a time. Now this is actually some sugar that I ground up in my blender to make powdered sugar. If you didn't know, you can easily make your own powdered sugar by grinding regular sugar in a coffee grinder, a blender, maybe even a food processor. So I was out of powdered sugar a while back and I needed to make some sort of cake. So that's actually what you're seeing here is homemade powdered sugar. It's quite easy to make if you didn't know that. So to ice these, I started out icing them on this plate, but then I realized that the plate was not flat and the icing was rolling off. I was going to put these in the fridge to let that icing harden, but we did have to transfer to a different baking sheet so that I could ice these Pop-Tarts that turned out so good. I told you we enjoyed these for breakfast one day at the campground and they were a huge hit. The chili is done and ready to take to the campground for dinner that night. And I'm just getting some last few things packaged up. I don't worry about storing in plastic when we are traveling. We don't travel that often, just a few times a year. So storing in plastic and plastic bags is not my biggest worry when we're traveling. Yes, ideally I would use glass. We are going camping and it's not ideal to take glass camping, so that's one of the things I just let go. We don't use plasticware on the daily at home. We don't store foods in plastic bags. So when we're camping, when we're traveling, that is one thing I don't fret over. Before I load all the food in the vehicle, load up the kids, and meet Tyler at the campground, I'll quickly run through what we're having for our meals while we're camping. Tonight, Thursday night, we're having chili in the crock pot and sourdough bread, which is right here. Take a knife and we'll cut it when we get there. For breakfast in the morning, we're having eggs and biscuits right here. I'll grab some jelly to go with that. Tomorrow night, we're having venison pot pie. Now, we actually have to come home tomorrow. We're only camping about 20 minutes from our house at a campground, pretty local, because we're attempting our first time primitive camping with 3 kids, and we didn't want to go too far off in case we needed to come back home. So anyways, tomorrow we're coming back home, and I will actually put together our dinner and take it with us tomorrow back to the campground. We're having venison pot pie. I already have the topping, the sourdough topping in the fridge. I will put it on top of the meat, the veggies, and the gravy tomorrow before we go back to the campground. Saturday morning, we're having eggs and pancakes. So that's another thing. Tomorrow, I will actually mix up our pancake batter, take it in a mason jar, and then we'll cook it on our griddle at the campground Saturday morning. For lunch Saturday, we'll have leftover pot pie from the night before, or meat tarts. I saw somebody make meat tarts in my last video, I believe. These are frozen. We are going to test out how they thaw out and warm them up on our griddle at the campground. I made these a little bit bigger this time, so they are a little hardier than the ones I made in that last video. They were like super tiny, but these were so good. Then for dinner Saturday night, we'll grill out burgers. I'm gonna make buns for that, which I'm gonna make tomorrow. I have quite a few things to make tomorrow. A lot of this was made today, but then I kind of was able to work in stages and make some of the stuff earlier this week, some of the stuff today before we leave. And then for our like 5-hour window, I'll be home tomorrow. I'll be able to make some more things to take with us for the rest of our camping trip. And then for snacks, we're just gonna take fruit. I have apples, bananas, oranges. We have the delicious apple Pop-Tarts. These turned out so good. I have chocolate chip cookies. We'll take raw milk to go with this. And I have banana nut bread muffins and magnesium. I have to get our raw milk, our orange juice, and that's it. Like I said, this is our first time primitive camping with 3 little kids in a tent. So this will be a fun adventure. I'm really excited for our kids to experience this. I love preparing home cooked food to take with us and not just making sandwiches the whole trip. There's nothing against that, but I know that my family will really appreciate the effort and time that I put into making these really delicious meals for them. So I will talk to y'all later and let you know how the camping trip goes, and see y'all in a future video. And at the last minute, we were reading a book about camping, and the book was talking about s'mores. So I decided I needed to make a homemade version of s'mores for my kids. So that's what you see here are our graham crackers. I'm actually planning to share more on how I homemade our s'mores very soon. So stay tuned for that.